I'm very confused. You're looking at me like, why am I wearing a motorcycle helmet? But I'm looking at you like, why are you not? Because this is the second week in Advent, so I'm very confused right now. But maybe if we just start the service, it'll make sense later. But no promises. Holy God, help us to give voice to the wonderful news. You yourself are coming to dwell among us. Quicken our imaginations to find new and creative ways to proclaim Christ's coming within us. Amen. So you ready for part 2 of the sermon? This week is the second Sunday in Advent. And traditionally that means talking about two things. Two things that on the surface might appear contradictory. What am I talking about? Well, those contradictions have already been played out in this service, although maybe we didn't quite notice at the time. But we have the fact that the Advent candle that Bill and Yolanda lit is called peace. And in contradiction to that, we have stories about John the Baptizer. And thank you, Marilyn, for reading that on short notice, especially with those interesting words in there. Because John was a wild man who lived in the wilderness, and he did some pretty wild things. So today, on the second Sunday of Advent, we are invited to reflect on the tension between peace and wilderness. But is that even possible? I mean, wild is often thought of as uncontrolled, unrestrained, out of control, undisciplined, unruly, rowdy, disorderly, riotous, unrestrained, abandoned. Maybe you've got other words for it. Peace is often thought of as calm, controlled, disciplined, ordered. On the surface, peace and wilderness seem like opposites. How do we understand peace and wilderness at the same time? Perhaps we need to scratch below the surface and get down to deeper meaning. Or maybe not. Perhaps if we scratch deeper, we might find that peace and wilderness are not only incompatible on the surface, we may find they are completely and irrevocably incompatible right to their core. Perhaps this reflection will not end in closure. Imagine that. And if at the end of this reflection you're disappointed, just remember Advent's a journey, and the journey will continue. Now, I hear some of you complaining already. Nice picture of Lake Louise for the benefit of the people working on the jigsaw puzzle. I hear you objecting from here. Sometimes you say, when we want to feel a sense of peace, we head into nature and into the wilderness, right? Away from the distractions of modern living. Surely peace and wilderness are sometimes compatible. Well, sorry, I really don't think so. I mean, yes, it's true, many people find peace in nature, and we often think of nature as the same thing as wilderness. But that's not the wilderness I'm talking about. Consider this guy. He's in nature, right? He probably thinks he's in the wilderness, and yet he's playing on his phone. And I invite you to look at his footwear. He's wearing sandals. I'm sure this guy is like 50 meters from his car. I mean, here's the thing. Yes, you and I can find peace in nature when we have car keys tucked safely into our pocket and we have a full tank of gas. We can find peace in nature when we have good camping gear that keeps the rain out and we have enough food. We can find peace in nature when we already have our GPS program to the nearest Tim Hortons. Yes, we can find that kind of peace. We can find peace in the wilderness when we stay in control. Sure, we can do that, and that's a lot of fun, and I encourage it. But it's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about wilderness when we actually pronounce the word properly, because I think it should be pronounced wilder-ness. And wilder means more wild. Well, more wild than what? Good question. More wild than what we can control. More wild than we can handle. That's wilderness. And that is what the second Sunday in Advent is calling us into. We are being invited into not being in control. You can see why it's not a very popular holiday. As Mario Andretti famously said, if everything seems under control, you're just not going fast enough. We cannot embrace wilderness and be in control at the same time. Something has to give, and we can either give up control or we have to acknowledge we're not really willing to go to the wilderness. Most of us, as you're aware, decide to never ever give up control under any situation whatsoever, and so we miss out on the blessings that can only be found in wilderness. There's a VIA train, that runs from Winnipeg to Churchill, Manitoba. Now, for many people, getting on a VIA train at all is approaching the wilderness, because only 59% of them arrive on time, apparently. But the route to Churchill, I think, is even more what you might call wild. This picture, I believe, is a section of track between Winnipeg and Churchill. Oh, Marilyn says yes. I've never been there. I like this image, though, because for me it shows the glaring contrast between the idea of wilderness and the idea of control. The track is completely straight and is very much controlled, although it does sink one now and then. The wilderness is everything else. If you've got good eyes, there's actually a power line off to the right as well. But when you look at this image, are you drawn to the straight track? Prepare ye the way of the Lord, make the paths straight. Or are you wondering what you just might find if you got off the straight and narrow and explored the wilderness that makes up the reality beyond the confines of this picture? What are you drawn to in this image? And perhaps to bring it closer to home, what did you hope I would talk about today? Peace and quiet and control, or wilderness? The tension between controlled and wilderness exists in our own lives. It's one of the basic human struggles. It even happens in the church. But this is a worship service during Advent. What if, heaven forbid, God shows up today? Would we not expect a certain amount of wild? Just for contrast, name a movie star you like. Who? We get a Brad Pitt over here. Just for contrast, what would you have expected during worship here today if last week I told you Brad Pitt might show up today? This place would be packed, right? There would be complete pandemonium. But last week I did tell you Jesus might show up today, which I actually believe, unlike Brad Pitt. And most of us are sitting here with the same face that we have when we watch commercials on TV. Where's the pandemonium? Did anyone even bring an air horn today? Is the possibility of meeting Brad Pitt really more exciting, Yolanda, than the reality of Jesus being present with us, in us, and through us? That's a question. Or consider this image of the Toronto Maple Leafs winning the Stanley Cup. Now, obviously I had to use artificial intelligence to create this picture because they're the Leafs, but look how excited they are. If you look closely, there's 3 captains as well. It's an interesting image. But look how excited they are. Are you telling me winning some tin cup is more exciting than the reality of God being with us? Or is it just that we are so used to the message that Jesus is coming into our midst that it doesn't really generate any excitement? One of my friends says the best proof that God does not exist is a lack of energy and excitement in our churches. And I don't have a snappy comeback for that. In the words of author and poet Annie Dillard, on the whole, I do not find Christians outside of the catacombs sufficiently sensible to conditions. Does anyone have the foggiest idea what sort of power we blithely invoke? Or, as I suspect, does no one believe a word of it? The churches are children playing on the floor with their chemistry sets, mixing up a batch of TNT to kill a Sunday morning. It is madness to wear straw hats and velvet to church. We should be wearing crash helmets. Ushers should give out life preservers and signal flares. They should lash us to the pews. For the sleeping God may wake someday and take offense, or the waking God may draw us out to where we can never return. I'm trying to give you some sense of what wild might look like. It's Advent, and we're waiting for Jesus to appear in our midst in some form. Now, in Jesus' day, if you wanted that sort of experience, you had to venture into the wilderness. and you had to deal with John. Meeting John, I think, was an event in itself. And I wonder why 2,000 years later, we expect to find Jesus staying all cozy and warm in the comfort of our living rooms or this sanctuary. Even the word sanctuary suggests a place of calm and peace. In other words, a place where nothing exciting ever happens. But on this, the second Sunday in Advent, perhaps a better name for this place is Launchpad. A launch pad being a place of energy, sound, smell, light, transformation, daring, risk, and uncertainty. And above all, a place of departure. Did you come here today for peace and quiet, or did you come here today as a point of departure into the wilderness? If the idea of a launch pad seems a little much, I invite you to consider departures from an airport, because the important thing about the second Sunday in Advent is this is a point of departure into the wild. Now, given our preference for peace and control, which I completely understand, we might wonder why so many people flock to John. Well, I'm pretty sure we don't really know the full answer, but we know that John represented the anti-establishment. John was very likely a homeless person. His dietary fare was that generally consumed by the poorer elements of society. He stood in bold relief to the wealthy, indulgent Jews of his day. As one commentator said, John was a walking sermon. If you lived in Jerusalem when John was around, you could find your salvation through the approved channels provided by the temple and the priests. Why on earth did people go to John? Clearly, the temple sacrificial system was not working. At least it was not working for everyone. The temple system was organized, controlled, calm. It was simple to understand because the priest would explain it to you. But perhaps the system was so controlled, there was no space left for God. And even if the priest couldn't figure that out, normal people, people like us, you and me, who long for deeper meaning, they figured it out. Even today, many people of faith, including people of deep faith, find they need to look beyond their own institutional church, at least once in a while, to help them grow spiritually. I mean, how many United Church people, judging by your ages, how many United Church people flocked to some televangelist like Billy Graham when he came to town? And that was exciting, and that was great. And then we were perfectly happy to come back to our own churches. But we needed a little boost from the outside. How many teenagers grew up in the church and found their faith only started to make sense when they went to a Christian summer camp? How many people grew up in a church and found their faith didn't quite gel until they started volunteering at a soup kitchen or hanging out with homeless people or something? Controlled and calm is great, of course, but sometimes we need to inject just a little bit of wild into our own lives in order to make sense of our own lives and our own faith. Now, I do understand many people came today probably looking for a certain amount of comfort and certainty and peace. And I hope you find that within the candles and the hymns and the prayers. But we're all old enough to know this is the second week of Advent. It's time for wild. And as Advent thunders forward, we continue to wait for Jesus in our midst. And if you know what you're looking for during Advent, you're not trying hard enough. Advent is not about being in control. It's about looking for Jesus in our midst. A Jesus who is beyond our control, obviously, and probably beyond our comfort zone. I mean, think of it this way. Any Jesus that we can control is too small to be part of the vastness we call divine, right? However, in honor of peace, it does appear all of you were right and I was wrong. I'm very disappointed to realize I didn't actually need to wear a motorcycle helmet today. The hope for wild did not really become manifest in our midst. But it's okay. Advent is a journey, and I've not given up my search, and I hope you have not either. So while we wait, what exactly are we supposed to do while we wait? And the crowds asked John, "What then should we do?" And in reply, John said to them, "Whoever has 2 coats must share with anyone who has none. Whoever has food must do likewise. Even tax collectors came to be baptized, and they asked John, "Teacher, what should we do?" John said to them, "Collect no more than the amount prescribed for you." Soldiers also asked him, "And we, what shall we do?" And John said, "Do not extort money from anyone by threats or false accusations. Be satisfied with your wages." So that was John's answer. What is our own answer in 2024 right here? Perhaps it means speaking to a stranger at a bus stop this week. Perhaps it means listening deeply to another human being who is frustrated, scared, lonely. Those people are all around right now. They're not hard to find. You'll find them everywhere, including waiting in line in stores and in many other places. So I invite us to share over coffee our own answers to this question. And I'm sorry I won't be there to hear. But I'll repeat the question for your benefit since I won't be there. What then should we do to make the presence of Jesus real today? You got homework now. I want to close with a quote from Richard Rohr. "How odd it is that God's salvation is so seldom recognized. How strange that what God is offering is so rarely experienced. We have presented salvation so poorly that much of the world does not even take it seriously. Oh yes, we want help, we want solace, we want magic. But I'm not sure we recognize or even want the scary freedom that God calls salvation." We are called to the wilderness. Let's all go wild this week. Amen.